Welcome to Business Spotlight. I'm Gavin Bellamy, and today I'm joined by Jess Summer, who is the founder, the CEO of Community Works. So, welcome to the call, Jess.
Thanks, Gavin. Nice to be here.
Well, listen, I know you're based in Brighton, and
Yep.
it's clear that what you do is based around community. Tell us a little bit more about what it is that you and Community Works is doing.
So Community Works we're a company limited by guarantee. We're also a registered charity. And we class ourselves first and foremost as a member of the voluntary community sector. That also includes social enterprises. And essentially it's a sector that's made up of organisations run by and for often members of the local community, and it's to try and support our communities at times of need with services that respond to their need, but also to make sure community voices are heard in local planning, local structures.
So it's a
My
forum as
organisation,
well. It's a forum for their voice.
yeah, we're a membership organisation, and we have a responsibility to make sure that voice is heard loud and clear, because some organisations don't get the opportunity to be heard. They're too small. They're getting on with the important work they're doing,
Hmm.
but their knowledge and their expertise still needs to be heard by councils, by NHS, by businesses, because it helps people understand their local community better.
Okay. And how is it that you got involved in this work? What was your driving passion, motivation?
So I started off, I was doing law at university, and I volunteered with a citizens advice bureau. And it opened up a whole new world to me, because I thought to have value or to add value, I would need to be within a commercial world. And what I learned through being part of citizens advice as a volunteer was there's a whole workforce of people who give their time, and then there is also the paid employees of organisations who give their time to support our communities. And that sort of opened my eyes to the voluntary sector. Really, it was a case of, oh, there is paid work within the voluntary sector. There is the opportunity to volunteer in multiple ways and give your skills to organisations that help the community. And there is a way to be part of a community by really working within it and understand it as well as living in it.
Hmm.
So that kind of opened my eyes, I think. And then from then on, I just felt like I was with like minded people, being driven by our values and our passions. So social justice was and is really important to me.
Yeah.
Um, Fighting inequalities, that sort of issue has been prevalent in society for such a long time, and
Hmm.
trying to ensure that people are heard feels really important to me. So I've worked in the charity and voluntary sector for about, I don't know, 25 years or so. And it still feels like an innovative, creative, caring, responsive place to work. And I think for me, it's alongside our business communities, it's alongside our council and NHS communities in terms of how we all come together and interlink to support local communities better.
Hmm. You say you're very much a values-driven organization, and that makes perfect sense. How do you attract the right people or select the right people to work with these
I
projects?
think I think there's a lot of people who are looking to have impact on their community. I think the reality of employment and the jobs market these days is people are looking for more than just the pay.
Yeah.
People want to feel like they're part of a community, or they're balancing multiple different areas of interest and possibly multiple different skills.
Yeah.
So that values piece about what matters to people really becomes important, because I think they're looking for places to give their skills, or to contribute their skills that actually enable them to give back to their community or to really understand their community. And for me, that's what the voluntary and community sector does. We provide that link with a community. The voluntary and community sector is so broad. So in Sussex, we work in Brighton and Hove, Ada and Worthing, and across Sussex. In Sussex, there's over 10,000 organisations, and they could range from tiny groups doing some very hands-on activities around perhaps mental health and being in the outdoors, or looking after our local assets. So whether they're looking after local parks and things like
Yeah.
that, to larger organisations providing quite significant housing solutions and supporting those who are homeless. So it's quite a varied sector, and I think that attracts people. Is the variety and creativity in the voluntary and community sector is I think attractive in itself.
I'm wondering whether, I mean, the type of people you attract must also, I suppose, have some degree of resilience because I can see that there's a danger of overwhelm here, where you've got so many things that you could be turning your attention to. It must be incredibly challenging to try and shortlist or decide what it is you're going to work with. And both uplifting, but also, depressing at the same time that there are things that are going to get left untouched. Is that a fair summary of yours and your colleagues?
I would say we're very used to challenge and we're very used to change. I think the voluntary and community sector isn't often able to generate enough income itself to keep all of its activities going. So
Right.
what we find is we have a mixed economy in terms of income. There's some generated income, there's some grant income, there's
Yeah.
contract income possibly, there's donated and legacy income. Um, and so what we often find is you have to get used to dealing with what that brings. And it is variety in the work, it is balancing different income, but also
Mm,
trying to cover all of the areas of work you want to achieve.
mm,
And I think often that balance comes back to what are our values, what are we trying to do? So each organization has its own set of values that set out what the organization believes, its culture,
yeah.
how it will act in terms of its service delivery method, and those really dictate then that narrowing down of and what should we do to deliver that. Because yes, you're absolutely right, it could be that you just want to say we want to have a positive impact in the world, but actually that's such a big aim, such a big thing to try and work towards, that you have to come back to
Yeah.
what's our particular skill set, what's our specific particular unique selling point, I guess, for want of a better
Yeah.
term, that means we can then hone that down to where's our contribution and how can we best contribute without stepping into the spheres of other organizations who are perhaps better placed using their skills to meet the other areas of need in our community.
Yeah. No, well, that makes perfect sense. It's interesting. I was listening to a presentation at our annual conference, business conference last week, and one of the speakers, whose name has slipped my mind, it may come back, was talking about how important it is to reward people financially for what they do that matches their skills, and making the point that it's okay to make a profit. And you mentioned just a few minutes ago about, you can make money in the voluntary sector. I'm wondering what the mentality is of many people who work in the voluntary sector, in the sense that is their expectation that they may not be as well remunerated for what they do as if they were in the corporate, but also equally, if you pay the right people of the right quality, the right amount, then you're going to attract the talent into the sector and therefore have a bigger impact and be more effective. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very real issue for the voluntary and community sector around remuneration and whether it meets the market level. I think
Yeah,
traditionally we've struggled to pay market prices because our income isn't as free as perhaps in the commercial world where you can generate your profits.
always
We're not
predictable, I guess, as well. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, we're not for profit, so any money that is then taken into the service delivery, we don't
yeah,
aim to deliver profit, we aim to deliver more service, more
yeah,
support.
yeah,
So what we will often find is contract prices coming from perhaps funders or statutory funders may not always meet the delivery costs,
yeah,
and therefore you come into a space of how do we meet the remaining costs, where do we cut back on some of the delivery, where do we hone in on the particular model to reduce our costs.
yeah,
And as you've highlighted, there's a dual situation where you look at how do we bring new people into the employment within our sector, and how do we remunerate them in a way that is attractive. And
yeah,
I think that's where the multiple benefits of a community voluntary sector come into play, because going back to my previous point, we may not be able to compete in some areas with commercial employers.
yeah,
Many of us do pay a living wage. At the very least, we're trying to ensure that our staff can afford to live in the
yeah,
area they work in, and that is possible because we're doing our best to meet the living wage.
yeah,
But what we also then have to look at and are the extras that we offer. So, in terms of being employed within a voluntary and community sector organisation, you may find that we're offering some of the employee assistance programs that many commercial providers offer.
yeah,
So, we're looking at how do we provide support, how do we provide a culture of accessing advice and help with your well-being with your financial and legal needs? How do we ensure that our employees have access to that? If we don't offer perhaps commercial rates in terms of wages, how do we offer other alternatives? And that might also include things like the community and the culture within an organization. So being brought into an organization that actually invites you as a whole person.
Yeah.
You come in and you are part of a community within that employment.
Yeah.
So how do we look at keeping people and attracting people? A lot of it again goes back to those values. Are we an organization that share an individual's values? If we're looking at how do we create equity, that might be attractive to someone who actually has a very strong commitment to personal equity and seeing the inequalities in our society need tackling. So those values may in themselves be a positive draw for people entering the job market.
I think that's a really important point. And it's interesting going back to your story where, your story is essentially, I trained in this area and I developed my skills and I got to quite a high level of skill. And then I decided how I wanted to apply it. When you look at the people that work alongside you on the voluntary and the remunerated basis, we always think about what they are doing for other people, but I wonder what the organization is doing for them as well, because you've mentioned change, you've mentioned challenge, you've mentioned continuity. I'm sure that this is developing the personal and the professional skills that people working with you.
I think what you often find is people are working with different skill sets as well, so they're always learning, because you don't really enter into a job and it remains siloed within its own sphere. Often what you're doing is different aspects, you're contributing to different projects and you're working alongside others. You have skills that enrich your own skills portfolio. So for me, I think there's a great development curve for people entering the job market in the voluntary and community sector, because they often get a chance to see other types of employment, work with other development models and delivery models. They do their continuing professional development based on values. So it might be they have particular interest in, say, trauma-informed practice, for instance.
Right.
That might be an area they may not get formal training in, but when they come into the sector, they learn to work with it. They'll receive training, and that may then follow them throughout their career as something they take through into every progression in their career. So I think, yes, that scope for learning and development within the voluntary and community sector is huge, because it's such a broad sector.
Yes.
And because there's such strong links, I think the connectivity between organisations can be really strong. So people see how other organisations work as well, and that allows for creation of positive relationships and learning.
You do some fantastic work in a fantastic space. I'm wondering, it's very difficult to predict the future, I suppose, and we live in challenging times, although we can probably have said that for most times in the last 100 years, but we're living in challenging times. What are you optimistic about? What are you excited about going forwards?
I think the thing that gives me hope at all times, really, no matter what happens with funding or with policy changes or leadership, I think what I see is a lot of leadership with integrity. So a lot of my peers, they are leading with integrity and they absolutely hold on to those values. So a lot of the decisions aren't necessarily purely economically driven. They're not purely socially driven or politically driven. They often are driven by their sense of, what are we here to do? Why do we all believe in this? And what's the culture of our organisation that allows us to continue to deliver? Because that drives, it means actually you still get that sense of shared hope for what can be and what you can have a positive impact on. And I think that is what gives me most hope. It's the people I work alongside, it's the organisations I work alongside, it's our colleagues within councils, within NHS, within funding organisations, who also share some of the same visions, some of the same values. And so I think connection with people who share that same vision is really important to create hope, especially when the news around us is chaotic and changing and negative in places and brings you down. I think that shared vision is really important.
Jess, that feels like the perfect place to draw that to a close. That's fantastic, and I'm sure many people really, really appreciate the work that you're doing, and it's great to be able to get some insights from yourself and an organization that is so values driven and operates with integrity the way you do. Thank you very much for your time.
It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you.